It's already been over 2 weeks since Japan imposed measures to tighten restrictions on exports to South Korea of key industrial materials. And eyes have also been on how the result of Japan's upper house election might affect the situation in the region. And on Sunday, Japan's ruling Liberal Democratic Party increased its majority in the House of Councillors. So where are Korea-Japan relations headed? For more on this, Dr. Kim Sang-woo of the East Asia Cultral Project joins us in the studio today. So good to have you with us.
Nice to be back.
All right, so is the latest election in Japan considered as Abe's victory? I mean, what's your assessment of the result of Sunday's election?
Well, some argue that it's a half victory, but I think in the eyes of Prime Minister Abe and the LDP, it's a victory because they have won one more seat in comparison to the election 3 years ago.
Right.
And they are short of 4 seats to push through the constitutional amendment vote. But the issues at hand for the election this time was quite controversial. Some of the issues, for instance, consumption tax, increase of consumption tax, pensions, Abenomics, and also the amendment of the constitution. So therefore, even getting this majority for Abe is a victory.
Now, there's been speculation that Abe imposed such measures against South Korea to garner the support of the conservatives in the country. So now the elections are over. What are possibly the chances that Abe might withdraw the trade restrictions against South Korea?
I'm sure that he had used this trade restrictions as partly as an election event, but I think that the government of Prime Minister Abe has been preparing this for a long time, and they will escalate this unless, of course, as Abe has indicated in his interview with the Fuji television, saying that President Moon has to come back with a proposition to resolve the issue of the forced laborers and the ruling of the Supreme Court issue, something that Japan can accept. Unless then, they will continue to proceed in implementing these retaliation.
Right. Now, going along with that, the Japanese government is actually asking for opinions from the public until this Wednesday before it decides whether or not to take South Korea off of its white list of trading partners. Now, why is Japan continuing to pressure South Korea despite the fact that the elections are over? And what would it mean for South Korea if it does get taken off from Japan's white list of trading partners?
I mean, Japan, as I said, has been preparing for this a long time, and they know how to hurt Korea. I mean, in terms of the 3 key components, already the semiconductor industry is going into a frenzy. And if we get off the white list, which is 27 countries, then it means that the export process will be very difficult, will be prolonged, and it will be about 1,100 items that will be involved.
Wow.
And this means that Japan can target any industry. For instance, the next could be the automobile industry, and targeting the hydrogen automobiles. They can do that, or telecommunication equipments.
Right.
So there are so many cards that Japan can use to hurt the Korean economy. And as a result of that, of course, the Korean economy will decline and have a very difficult time. But having said that, in the long term, it's not just Korea that will suffer.
Right.
Japan will also suffer, and the global economy will suffer as a consequence. So therefore, already there are those who are criticizing Japan's approach to resolve the issue that they are unhappy with, of course. They are asking that a diplomatic solution is achieved. However, now that the national sentiment within both countries are heated up, it's very difficult for either side to back down.
Right.
So we're kind of in a very difficult situation where two sides will have even more stronger positions and take a tougher stance.
Right, and that's why the tensions are rising even
The tensions
farther.
are rising.
Now, Abe, however, going back to what you talked about, the amending constitution, Abe actually failed to achieve the 2/3 majority needed to revise the constitution. So what could that tell us about the public sentiment in Japan in regards to revising the constitution?
Well, some arguing that he is 4 votes short of pushing through a bill to amend the constitution in the upper house. This is the result of the election of the councillors. However, they already have a 2/3 majority in the lower house in Congress, and one of the opposition party, which is the Democratic for the People Party, which has about 13, 15 seats, has already said that they will enter into a dialogue with the LDP to talk about the constitutional amendment.
Okay.
And they have also stressed that the way to resolve the conflict between Korea and Japan is that for Korea to bring something that Japan can accept. It's the same position as the Prime Minister Abe and the government's position. So if Prime Minister Abe is able to persuade some of the party people of the DPP or the independents, pro-LDP independents, I'm sure that he can obtain that four votes to pass through the constitutional amendment bill. But having said that, even if Parliament passes the amendment constitution bill, they also have to go through the public referendum, which is they need a majority of the people. So that is something that, of course, still, Abe's term lasts until next year. He still has time to persuade the people, and depending on how this plays out, the conflict between Korea and Japan, I think Japanese people are also quite critical about how Korea is handling the situation of the relationship between the two countries, because 71% of the population has supported Prime Minister Abe's trade restrictions towards Korea.
All right. Now, like we said before, his term actually ends in 2021, and it's been his signature goal, actually, to amend and revise this constitution. So at this point, we're wondering, why is he trying so hard to get this done?
Well, it's not a secret that he hasn't been happy or satisfied with the constitution, which was established after the war and as the country that had lost the war. It was forced upon them in some sense. And now, with a new sort of global situation where there is a lot of uncertainty, Japan wants to become a normal country in the sense that the Constitution, Article 9 of the Constitution, is a sort of a peace treaty which does not allow Japan to have a military force. So a normal country does have a military. So he wants to stipulate that the national defense forces into the Constitution. So in other words, a step towards becoming a normal country where it can have its own military and it can decide on its own ways of doing these things. Because up till now, they lived under the security umbrella of the US. And they no longer think that the US will continue to provide that security in the long run. And Japanese people are very uncertain about how the situation is developing in Northeast Asia and the world.
Right. Now, talking about the military, I mean, amid the deepening diplomatic spat between Seoul and Tokyo, there are growing doubts over this military intelligence sharing pact between the two countries, also known as the General Security and Military Information Agreement. Now, tell us more about this agreement and what would it mean for the two countries if it does get revoked?
Well, I don't think that Korea should use this as a countermeasure against what Japan is doing. I mean, because the military intelligence sharing is actually, we are getting much more out of it than Japan is. Because what we're doing is that we're looking at North Korea military movements, nuclear and military facilities, missile launches. And this, you need to have satellites that overlooks and presents. But the US satellites can do so much. It can cover maybe 10 minutes on the Korean Peninsula. Whereas the Japanese satellites, they cover the 50 minutes, the other 50 minutes of that. And then they have the Aegis naval vessels that has radars that range up to 1,000 kilometers. And also their surveillance aircraft are also with high-powered radar. So for Korea, which is surrounded by three parts of the ocean, it's very difficult for Korea military forces alone to properly survey and to have eyes upon the movements of North Korean military activities. So we do need the Japanese information intelligence as well.
So we should try our best to not get this revoked, rather get
and also U.S. will be very much against that, because it is in the interest of the trilateral alliance to have this close kind of military cooperation. However, having said that, if emotions flare like this and there is animosity towards the two Koreas and Korea and Japan, then it will be very difficult to expect a very
reasonable
way of cooperation, because there will be a lot of emotion there.
Right. Now, talking about emotions and such, and rising tensions between the two countries, we have been seeing more and more South Koreans hitting back by boycotting travel to Japan and refusing to eat Japanese food, boycotting buying Japanese products altogether. How do you view this situation?
Well, I think it's only natural. I mean, Koreans are angry at the unwarranted and very hostile action against Korea. I mean, these kinds of trade retaliation restrictions and escalation of that is very damaging and very hurtful. Whereas Koreans still view that Japan has wartime atrocities, colonial past, that still we have feelings about, and we don't feel that Japan has properly made amends with that. And having Japan to come against Korea in this manner, Koreans are angry. But having said that, I mean, I have never seen a successful ban. I mean,
here in Korea against
not
Japanese.
just Korea, worldwide. You know, there were many incidents where there were bans on various issues, but it didn't last long. That's the problem. I mean, maybe if it continued for years, maybe it can have an effect and a damage towards the Japanese economy. But when we look at the trade relations with Japan, we have a large trade deficit with Japan, because we import a lot of these components and these materials. So actually, the deficit means, okay, maybe that Korea now can look elsewhere and decrease the deficit, and maybe it will hurt the Japanese economy in the long run. But in the short term, the industries, the companies, the Korean companies that manufacture for the global market will suffer. And it will tarnish the reputation of these companies and the reputation of Korea as well. So boycotts is something that is short-sighted, short-term thing that eases the so-called anger and tension of the public.
Right. Now, let's look at the U.S. I mean, it's been trying kind of hard to keep its Asian allies, South Korea and Japan, together. And, you know, it needs the cooperation from the two countries, as North Korea is continuing to threaten with its nuclear threats. And also there's China's assertiveness, growing assertiveness in the region. So what role could the U.S. be playing from here on out?
Well, in the past, of course, before President Trump, U.S. has always played a very key role, and they've worked very hard for the alliance to work, the trilateral alliance, because they placed very much importance on the alliance. This is up to close President Obama, before him, President Bush as well. President Trump is a different person altogether. He doesn't place that much importance on alliances. He was voted in as a result of the so-called discontent of the American people of the manifest destiny of America,
Right.
Being the so-called leader of the free world and the policeman of the international scene. They want America to be looked after, not the world. So the U.S. is being very tough on their allies about providing defense budgets because they want Europe, not NATO, to spend much more. They want Korea to spend much more, Japan to spend much more. And U.S. has started a trade conflict already with China. So, I mean, having a trade conflict with China and then coming back here and saying trade conflict is no good, shouldn't do that, is a bit of a hypocrisy in a sense. So it's going to be difficult. And also, of course, we have to understand that there is a very tough negotiation to take place between President Trump and Prime Minister Abe. Their trade agreement also has to be negotiated again. So all this will make U.S. reluctant for the time being to actually actively mediate in our problem. However, if it affects the U.S. economy and affects the military alliance directly, and the U.S. and President Trump sees that this is going to be something that will just be a disadvantage to the U.S., then maybe they will step in to do something. But it's
something to keep our eyes on. Yeah.
For the short term, we're going to be in a very difficult position.
All right. Thank you so much for your insight today.
Thank you.
And that does it for this edition of News in Depth. From all of us here at Arirang, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you right back here at the same time tomorrow.